Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to speak on the third and final reading of this Environment Canterbury Democracy Abolition Bill and removing water conservation orders from Canterbury. This bill is all about what the Prime Minister told us at the opening of Parliament. He said to us, this government will take action this year to remove regulatory roadblocks to water storage and irrigation in Canterbury. The government has decided that the elected councillors in Canterbury are part of the regulatory roadblocks, and they've decided they're going to remove them. And that's what this bill does. The government has also decided that water conservation orders, the national parks for rivers and lakes, are also a regulatory roadblock to more irrigation and water storage in Canterbury, and so they're going to remove those as well. And that is a very significant part of this bill, which has had some attention but probably should have even more, because the subpart 3 of part 3 of this bill, which basically guts water conservation orders, is a very significant change to the way that we regulate the environment in our country. Mr. Speaker, this bill, at its foundation, is all about the fact that water is a finite resource. Water has become incredibly valuable all over the world because it's a finite resource, and humankind keeps expanding its consumption of finite resources. And Canterbury has access to quite a lot of this finite resource, and it has become an incredibly valuable resource. I'd say commodity, but of course the irrigation and dairy companies get it for free, so to call it a commodity is perhaps stretching things a little bit. So having access to free, fantastic water has been an enormous economic boon to the dairy corporations and to the irrigation companies. And that's really what is driving this bill. This bill has been set up in order to allow more access, as if there hasn't been enough, to more of the water resources of Canterbury, so that more rivers can be dammed, like the Huranui, which is top of the list at the moment, but there'll be others. More rivers can be drained of their water. Part of the reason why the Ashley is in such terrible shape and why it keeps killing dogs every year is because so much water gets drained from it for irrigation. And more water can be polluted. Anyone who's tried to go onto Lake Ellesmere Te Waihora recently would have come across the high level of pollution in that lake, as well as many other rivers and lakes right across Canterbury. And Canterbury has been the victim of malign neglect for so long, but it looked like the Regional Council was going to get on top of it. It looked like there might be the potential for the Regional Council to finally take some action. The Regional Council upset some very powerful vested interests. It upset some very powerful vested interests with some very close connections to the National Party, and for that reason it's now paying the price. So the Prime Minister said that he was going to take action to remove these regulatory roadblocks. The next step was, of course, to get in the Creech report. Now, the thing about the Creech report, the problem with it is twofold. A, that the person that did it had a clear conflict of interest, being the director of a dirty dairy company. But more than that, it had some fundamental flaws. It was a very short review, interviewed a handful of stakeholders. It was anti-science. It said that the Regional Council should be punished for being too science-led. It was very anti-environment. It said the Regional Council wasn't pro-economic growth enough, having no idea, I guess, because they hadn't looked at the Resource Management Act to realise that, in fact, that was part of the job of Environment Canterbury, and that's what the E stood for in Environment Canterbury. I think if they didn't know what the E stood for in ECAN, then maybe they weren't the right people to review the Regional Council. Maybe they wanted to call it Exploitation Canterbury. Maybe that was what they want. They thought the E stood for, so that we could exploit the water resources of Canterbury rather than Environment Canterbury. And so it was very critical of ECAN because it spent too much time protecting the environment and not enough time exploiting it. This bill removes democratic rights from the people of Canterbury, about 400,000 people, for about 3.5 years, or possibly more. I thought Jo Goodhue hit it on the head. She said, democracy has been interrupted, she says, and will be resumed as soon as practicable. Democracy has been interrupted and will be resumed as soon as practicable. Is that what democracy is? Is that the kind of thing democracy is? That's the kind of value for the National Party. And that's what it thinks democracy is. It's the kind of thing that you can interrupt for a while, and when the powers that be, who are smarter than all of us, obviously, Joe Goodhue knows better than the rest of us, as soon as it's possible and practicable, then the people of Canterbury can have democracy again, because they're children. They're children, the people of Canterbury. That's what the National Party thinks. And they've had to interrupt their democracy, and they're going to resume it as soon as practicable. That's what Joe Goodhue said. Joe Goodhue also inadvertently hit the nail on the head when she said the problem is that you try to get access to water consent and it takes ages. Yeah, that's no kidding. There are red zones in Canterbury where water is over-allocated. And Environment Canterbury has tried to restrict taking more water in the red zones, and boy, hasn't it made the irrigators mad.
Order. Time for me to leave the chair. I shall resume the chair at 7:30 p.m.